when we started writing for Death Magnetic, and I've said this 1,000 times, there was I think a newfound appreciation of a band that was functioning, a band that was working well together after the issues of the early part of the Saint Anger process and all that, some kind of monster stuff. I think we were unsure about what was going to happen. So when we met in that room in there in October of 2005, there were no cameras, there was no performance coach, there was no whole thing. It was just like 3 or 4 dudes writing a bunch of rock and roll songs. And that was really cool. That felt like a kind of a rebirth. When we sat down to write Lords of Summer, it was a continuation of that. And when we met up here in, I believe it was mid-September of 2014, it felt like the same kind of energy was just, let's get going, let's have fun with this. We hadn't actually really made a decision about who was going to steer the ship. We just wanted to start writing. We were just writing. We were pretty sure that we probably didn't want to go to LA. We very quickly, from say mid-September, in like 6 weeks or something, probably had the foundations for, let's call 15 songs. Right. And so we're sitting there, it's like, wow, this is working. This is a vibe, blah, blah, blah. So we spoke to Greg Fidelman and we said, would you like to helm this record? Basically what we were doing was we were just continuing where we left off with Death Magnetic in terms of the spirit of the songs and the process. The biggest difference between the bulk of the songwriting on this record and the bulk of the songwriting on the last record is that we were more on our own this time. I think that if you hear some of the earlier versions of some of these songs, they were longer, a little more all over the place. And one day, James comes in and says, some of the stuff's getting a little crazy. Songs were getting kind of longer. We're starting to, 8 minutes, 9 minutes, riff 12, riffs 13. I remember coming in and going, some of the stuff's running a little bit amok, rather than on Death Magnetic, where we continued to sort of push it to get crazier and loopier and more ridiculous. On this record, it was more the opposite. I said to James and Greg, I don't think we have an opener. Why don't we write an opener? And then we sort of hepped each other up and said, let's write a short, punchy opener, and let's write a song that is the opposite of the classic Metallica opener, which is the picking guitar on the left side, morphing into a big intro with harmonies and drum patterns and accents and ta-dum and dum, and then boom, and then it ends up on the main riff and off we go. Let's do the opposite of that. That was the battle cry. And so we walked into that room and we had a couple riffs and we jammed on those, and we tried to figure out an opening, and I said, how about this drum thing I had in my head, and then it came together in like 2-3 days. And then, it was the whole, let's get the record out this year instead of waiting till next year. And that's when the decision was made to kind of, if we're going to play a new song, let's play a new song in Minneapolis. That was literally like a couple weeks before, and that's when Hardwired was picked as the first taste. But when it was written and recorded in, late May, June, it wasn't written or recorded as the first taste. It was recorded as the opener. So it's a constant, almost daily evaluation. Is it good? Is it great? Can it be better? Can that be better? Can this be better? Can this be better? Should that go over there? All that kind of stuff. So this record is still very fresh to me, but I must admit that the couple times I've heard it, I was like, fuck, this is, there's something about the sort of the intensity and the sort of the continuous just slap in the face.
On the outset, I think the idea was to make an album that was a similar approach to Kill 'Em All. And that was an album that was pretty much, driven by Lars and James with a little help from Mustaine. And I think the concept was that, you know, for those two to spearhead that whole creative process again in much the same way as Kill 'Em All was done. Came to the table with what I'm here for, you know, which is lead guitar. And the thing about Kill 'Em All is I pretty much showed up and you know, started off with how the solos were traditionally started. You know, the first, like, you know, 4 or 8 bars of the guitar solo on Kill 'Em All I would play and then just improvise the rest. You know, there's some instances where I went a little bit more in one direction, towards what was already there. There's instances where I just went far into another direction and played something completely different. So it was a mix-up on Kill 'Em All. But, you know, having said that and having recollected my experience, you know, I thought it would be great if I didn't work on the guitar solos beforehand. It's a pretty bold thing, and, you know, it's a really challenging thing because I like to be well prepared when it comes to anything that has to do with music and my guitar playing. I want to, you know, show up to the scene knowing my parts, being able to execute them perfectly, and, you know, being able to, like, come up with spontaneous pieces of music when I need to. You know, that's my thing, is showing up well prepared, and that was my MO for all the albums. This time around, I just said to myself, you know, in the past, a lot of the times the stuff that ended up on those albums was what I first played. You know, the very first thing. So when I showed up, you know, first day, start doing guitar solos, just to kind of, like, you know, have a springboard, I would come up, have maybe a loose idea of how I was going to start the solo, and I could only do that the night before I was coming in. I couldn't do that 2 nights before, 3 days before, a week before. I didn't want to do that because I'd be in the process of pre-thinking it. I didn't want to pre-think it. I wanted to capture a moment, be 100% spontaneous, and improvise as much as possible to really catch whatever is going to come out. It forced me to have faith in my own abilities. Mm-hmm. It forced me to be confident in what I've done in the past and confident that I could do it again in the future. It was only just a matter of where we wanted to go with it, what we wanted to do with it, you know, what sort of vibe we wanted to create, you know, melodic vibe or ripping vibe, you know, more groove vibe, you know. We had it all. In the past, whenever I would work on my guitar solos and then show up at the studio and put what I worked out on the album, and I would see what I worked out on the album or worked out for the song make it to the album, then, you know, I'd have a pretty good idea of, you know, the worth of that solo. This time, it's just like, it's all the playing is really just for the song. And so it's hard for me to like really establish, you know, what worth any particular solo has in it, because all of them, you know, I didn't really work on at all. I just came in and threw them down. You have to understand that, you know, I went in there and played this stuff totally off the cuff. Now the follow-up to that is I have to go in and then learn what the heck I played.
Wow, Lords of Summer seems like lifetimes ago. It was a standalone piece. I mean, it really was, in my opinion. It was us, I guess, maybe starting the recording, starting the idea of an album. We're between making records. Let's do a song. Let's just go in and put a song together. I think Lords of Summer was a great feel and getting some great feedback from the crowd. People, you know, chanting along with it, knowing the song. us being on our own, away from a record company, putting the song out ourselves, just one song, see what happens. It's like it was a sign of freedom. We could do whatever we want with it. You don't have to record a whole record. You don't have to do it this way. You don't have to do it that way. We made a song and we played it live and we made it available to people. Simple as that. I always come in with this attitude of, all right, we're going to try this sound. I want to put this on the record. I want to, getting really, I don't know, like even Jimmy Page-ish, let's just totally take the rules and tear them up and friggin' go for something completely wacky. And, we have done that in the past with certain things, and sometimes it's worked and sometimes it hasn't. Nothing else matters. A symphony, oh my God, it actually worked. Low Man's Lyric, maybe not as much, but there's something exciting. I get excited about creating. It is a new era, and I don't think we've fallen for any trend ever, really. It's what feels right. I mean, to be popular is one thing, but to be an artist is another thing. And to me, being an artist is way more important than being popular. So if we have to do certain things to stay popular, to get our music out there, I don't think I'm willing to do a lot of the stuff. I want the music to talk, and obviously the most important thing for me is people coming to the shows to watch us speak our music. And that's where it's the most satisfying. So the whole sentence of, hardwired to self-destruct came from a friend of mine that, he was kind of throwing out there as a struggling addict, is that what it is? Is that what it's like for us? Are we just, our default is die earlier than we're supposed to, destroy, wreck, destroy our lives. Are we hardwired to self-destruct? And that just kind of, that caught my ear. But I would love to hear some of these songs live, absolutely, because they're very powerful and they're really good.
Well, Lords of Summer for me was a song that represented a time when we were gearing up for basically summer jams, and in a lot of ways it was the launch pad for what we were about to take on. I would say probably, 3 years ago or something, we started to really kind of dive in and go through the process of elimination. Some ideas survive, some ideas don't. There were more ideas probably than ever. But I think for this album, it kind of makes sense that we really kind of reconnected with the old school, and it's almost like the old school on steroids, I feel. I'm very proud that there's energy and just a lot of firepower in what we're delivering on this record. In terms of production, sound, drums, bass, just locked in, tight, solid, crushing, really. I mean, I'm so proud of how we actually played on this body of music. I look at it this way: whatever I can do for the band, whether it's support the band by writing riffs, transitions, or whatever needs to happen, that I'm there for that. If it's to support the band and just play kick-ass bass, I mean, we always jam, so you can't go wrong with a James Hetfield riff. We're still playing together and we're still jamming, and the parts that I'm writing as a bass player are still a part of the creative journey. So it's not like a Robert Trujillo song and whoever else, I'm there to support Metallica. I am proud of this album for different reasons, in the way that I was proud of Death Magnetic for different reasons. And I'm looking forward to the next journey we're going to take, because there's a lot already, I think, that's going to happen there too. I want to grow with this band. I feel like since I joined, 13 years plus ago, that they've made me better, and I want to keep growing. Any situation I'm in, I like to learn, and I feel like I've been able to learn with them. I think this album, though it's heavy and it's in your face, there's a lot of groove in there, and that's what makes me really happy. And that came from jamming, you know, the rhythm section. Actually, in this one, you know, we're feeding off of each other, and we're finding our place, and you know, we're basically the foundation and creating the pulse of this new music. And the great thing about Greg as a producer is that he understands all that. I think drums and bass are important to Greg. So he's constantly trying to find ways to make the rhythm section more powerful. It's great to hear the process that's gone on the vocal production, on the vocal end, and to hear where it's ended up is really, really great to me. I'm really proud of James and what he's done as creatively with his voice. I personally trusted the riffs that we had to choose from, which were plenty. There's no shortage of ideas that happen in this band. It's crazy. I've never seen anything like it. At least I know this. I know that what we all put into what we do, what we give is 120%. You know, we're not flakes. Band works hard. You know, like I told you with James and his journey with the lyrics and the melodies and how he approaches that in the time that he gives to that process. It's important to understand, you know, there's the art in that alone. And to me, that is what separates the men from the boys. I feel on this album, people will connect with it, and they'll feel the aggression, and they'll feel, you know, the hard work that's been put into this, you know. I'll tell you my favorite track, Spit Out the Bone.
Oh, yeah.
That song has grown into something I believe is truly special. It's got a lot going on, but it all fits. But in creating it, you know, there were a lot of sort of issues and like complaints, and even I found myself complaining about certain sections, and then when it was all said and done, it was just really awesome. And I give Lars credit because he had a vision with that song and he stuck to it, and you know, I definitely take my hat off to him because it's really grown into a very special piece of music, and probably my favorite song on the record right now. You know, and I like all these songs, so it's a standout performance to me.
The first concert I ever went to that I set into motion, I requested to go, I figured out how to get tickets, was the Kiss Alive 2 performance at the Forum in Los Angeles in '77, I guess that would have been. So, and then, you know, it was one of my first big rock show, and that was a really big rock show for 1977. So soon after that, I went playing guitar, learning how to play guitar, getting into more into rock, Aerosmith. This is now, you're talking like the later part of the 70s, 78, 79. And then I started to get into, you know, Zeppelin became a big thing for me when I sort of discovered that. Being in LA in 79, 80, 81, now I'm in high school in the early 80s, started to get into the punk scene. I think I went to New Year's Eve 1980, I think I went to a punk show at the Olympic Auditorium and saw like Black Flag and, you know, that kind of a thing. And I had long hair at the time, so I don't know if you recall what that might have been like, but having long hair at a punk show in 1980 in Los Angeles was definitely courageous. I just was sort of frustrated with the whole where the LA scene was going, and we just decided like, hey, let's, you know, start a rock band. At that point, you know, Guns N' Roses had just burst out of the scene in '86. So this is now '87, '88 is when we finally started to really create some noise, and got lucky and got a record deal. And so I had tried to get a job at Sound City, and they weren't really hiring. And after I worked like a week at Track Records, I'm going to call again. And I called Sound City again, and it was one of those moments like that was the right, you know, there was a 20-minute window for me to call, and I happened to just get lucky and nail it. So I got the gig, and I ran at Sound City for, I don't know, I was a runner there for probably about 6-7 months. A runner during the day, and then I got a side job at night helping a guy who did like installed consoles and repaired equipment that was in the same parking lot
cool.
as Sound City.
Oh wow.
And I knew a little bit how to do wiring as I could solder a wire together. I could, help him out, and I was willing to work for cheap and to do long hours. So I started working with him. So that I also started to get like a little more knowledge in the technical aspect of some things. And he was the guy that would fix stuff when it broke at Sound City.
Right.
So that also helped me kind of just get my brain into it. One of the early assistant gigs that I had there was with Rick was producing the Johnny Cash, sort of the second Johnny Cash record there, where it was, most of the backup band for Johnny was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. You can't learn more in that amount of time than watching that thing go down. I mean, that was insane. The way that those kind of records went down was just, it's almost like watching a movie. It was hard to believe that it was happening. From talking about a song to making it sound like a record, the amount of time that would go by was like nothing. It was like, they go out there, they're playing, he's playing the piano, now he's playing the organ, he's on acoustic guitar, now he's on electric guitar. Holy shit, this sounds amazing. Take 3, all right, we got it. Working with Rick at that capacity, he's puts a lot of trust into his engineers, and it seemed to be a good fit. He brought me and talked to me about the Metallica thing. But I came in on the Death Magnetic record. They had already gone through full pre-pro. I came down here to HQ at I think it was one rehearsal before I started cutting the record. So I came up, met the guys, we talked a little bit, and then a couple of weeks later we were in LA cutting drums. So when the guys bring me in, like for this record, Monday we could be writing a song, and Tuesday we could be doing pre-production on a song, but no one said the word pre-production. And Thursday we could be recording the master track for the record, and they might not even know it when it's happening. It's just, it can be used as that. And there wasn't this thing in the past working with them. It was always writing, and then writing's done, pre-production, and a lot of times that would be in even a different location. Now we're done with that. Now it's, pull the cables on everything and move the show to whatever studio it was. It was definitely funner and easier, for lack of a better word. It was just a little less painful. Atlas Rise, for instance. He had one verse. The choruses we sort of got fairly early on. Didn't have other verses. Then we decided to tweak the verses a little bit. I think for the longest time he didn't have lyrics for the third verse. And he came in and sang them, and it was kind of like, God, the third verse is not as good as the other two verses. Then a month would go by, and we'd come up. I'm like, any more ideas on the Atlas thing? And he came in, and at the end of the day, he hits a home run. The third verse is probably my favorite. So one of the unique things about Lars is he's a really creative guy. He's really song-oriented in the way he does everything, the way he plays his drums. He's playing the song, not playing the drums. So it's the drum part, but the way he approaches it is much more song-specific.
Interesting.
So the value of that is not measurable, I think. It's what makes what he does so cool. And the way that he works, we already talked about the thing with him and James is also super unique. Capturing that is really the gig here. One of the other great things about this sort of staying set up and working in batches and stuff that we did was not at the first round, but by the second round of songs, we had sort of already developed our guitar sound. The idea of what the solos were going to be was not really wrenched on until we were in the middle of it.
So a lot more in the moment for him, maybe.
More in the moment, and some people could say that's, why are you going to spend more time, blah, blah, blah. Anyone who thinks that's never made a record. So, because sometimes the best thing is the first thing. So, and especially when you're dealing with someone like an improviser like Kirk could be. I mean, Kirk could lay down, and I'm not exaggerating, I'm probably under-exaggerating. You could do 50 passes, and none of them will be the same. So, this one is definitely a little more, Kirk Hammett, lead guitar, go, and he just rip a solo. And it wasn't that we didn't work on them. We definitely worked on them. But
he took the approach of wanting to be more improvisation.
A little fresher, yeah.
Great.
Kirk is the most receptive musician I've ever seen. Just can take any kind of like a Blackmore thing, look, whatever. I don't even know what that meant, and he'll give you 5 versions of it. And you're like, that kind of was Blackmore's. Or go up here and then get crazy and get fast and then get melodic and come up with a hook here. And he could just do it. Just does it. And Lars has a knack for being able to get him into a flow and get him to go in certain directions. It's unique and cool to watch. Rob's a really talented bass player. And Rob is also his personality is, I don't think anyone on the planet could say that they don't like Rob. You know what I mean? And he's such an easy guy to have around, and he brings so much to the table. That's a not common combination of things. Super easygoing, positive, great energy, great guy to have in this particular band, I think. A couple of songs, is it Now That We're Dead and was it Dream No More? Those 2 songs have the majority of the song is from a take that when we were recording it, we thought we were rehearsing. That we just, as soon as we heard it, was like, that's the one, that's the version, that's the way the song should go. And we knew it's going to be hard to beat that. So we kind of knew that one going in. We tried to beat it, and we didn't. And we ended up going and using the live stuff. And that's what the record is.
I moved to join a ballet company out in LA. And then when I decided that that wasn't going very well for me, I was like, what else can I do? I had a bunch of friends in bands, so I wanted to do live sound. I wanted to be, front of house. I wanted to go on tour.
Interesting. Okay.
I was young. So I went to a vocational school to go to learn more about the whole audio thing. Because I knew I loved music. I knew I loved bands. I knew I loved the whole scene. But I didn't really know much. I didn't know how it worked. The people at the school were like, yeah, probably you could try out the live sound stuff, work in clubs and stuff, but maybe you should try the studio, you might be cut out for the studio. And I was like, ugh, no, I don't think so. And I was like, fine, I had to get intern hours done, so I was like, I'll give it a shot. I was lucky enough to have a paying internship, which doesn't happen at all, And I was still working. I was working at Starbucks, I was working all night at the studio and then working at Starbucks in the morning. It was awesome. Getting to learn all the gear and actually getting to be in the studios, because they'd let us be in the studios when there wasn't people actually renting the room out for the day or whatever, and you got to mess around and talk to the techs, and school was great, but I really didn't get to learn stuff until I was actually hands-on in the studio. And I started working up the ladder at studios. I was running, getting people's food, cleaning toilets, and then started assisting. I finally got a chance to get in the rooms, and I did that for a very long time. But, it was awesome. I got to work with a bunch of different people, different bands, different R&B, rap. Rod Stewart, that was awesome.
He's pretty cool, actually.
I first started working for Greg during Death Magnetic, basically. He called me, which was weird. I was working at a studio called The Pass. I did a Chili Peppers record. That's how I kind of got into the Rick camp. I got into mixing, the mix side as an assistant on the Stadium Arcadium record. Basically, my daily job is I come in and I take a bunch of notes, keep track of everything that happens throughout the day, make note of takes of what people say. After all of that, I do a lot of setting up of gear, microphones, making sure everything's working. I help edit. So, the way Greg and Rick record records is they kind of do it more in a live nature. So they have drums, they have all the instruments, the other band members are there playing along, and it's so exciting, It's so exciting to see in the chemistry between people. And I appreciate that a lot. I understand not everybody can play that way and record that way, but it's pretty exciting for me, So, and just listening to the ideas that Rick has, to artists, and the way that he really takes people in, and it's more he makes it more of a spiritual experience, I feel like, and I'm just sitting, taking notes and being like, wow, Like, this is so cool. You would imagine that rock and roll is tough, but it really isn't, you know? Like, everybody looks out for each other. It's more of a family.